Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by a Full Press Coverage. As we like to do from time to time, Sap, we check in on the hometown team here in Boston, see how the Celtics are doing because they're in the middle of a couple interesting rumors and some injuries to key players, and they've had a very confusing and frustrating season. So we'll talk about them a little bit, talk about my early impressions of Coach Ime Udoka and yours too. I don't know why I just said mine, Sap. I'm being very selfish.
Well, very selfish, but you can have your take and I'll have my take. That's why we do this show together.
I made it seem like you're just it'll be like Felger and Maz. I'll give my take and you just have to say yes.
You're right, Jet. I'll just go with that, with
I
a
don't
little
like that.
higher pitch voice. Yeah. You're right, Jet.
There was also a fight in the NBA between the Nuggets and the Heat. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But let's start with the Celtics, Sap. We've talked about them in some past shows, my frustrations with them, and nothing's changed in terms of, big picture. I think that this team relying on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to sort of the pillars or the direction of building a championship team. I think that's foolish. And I think it's shown at this point that it's not going to work. But people disagree with me. They're wrong, but they disagree with me. And that sort of has come up a little bit more this week because there's been rumors about a potential Ben Simmons trade involving Jaylen Brown. Those were quickly shot down by the Celtics. Here's what I believe, Sap, and then I'm going to get your take on it. I believe the Celtics had exploratory talks and were interested in Ben Simmons because he's obviously available. He's a young all-star. Why not? I don't believe for a second they ever offered Jaylen Brown for him because Simmons' value is at an all-time low. Right now, Jaylen Brown's value is higher. So I don't think that ever happened. And it would, if it did, and the Sixers didn't immediately say yes, then the Sixers are idiots. And the Celtics offered that in the first place, then they're idiots.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see a even swap of Ben Simmons for Jaylen Brown. First of all, the contracts don't match up, so you'd have to throw in some other pieces to make it work. As you said, Jaylen Brown gets better every single year, and Ben Simmons is at this point a distressed asset. But Daryl Morey, I mean, the report from Shams was that he's looking for Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, and draft picks, which obviously is far too much for Ben Simmons. Then you have the Celtics Nation, people on Twitter or on blogs or whatever saying, well, we'll give them Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, and draft picks, and that should get it done. That's not going to happen either. The 76ers have other options to look to get more back for Ben Simmons. The problem with Ben Simmons right now, he's not playing, and his value continues to go down, and that's a problem for the 76ers. In the perfect world, you could get Ben Simmons to go along with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. That would give you a heck of a big three. I don't know if it would win a championship because they're all in the same space. They're at the same point in their career. I don't know how that's going to work. Could it just be like Oklahoma City 10 years ago, part two, with Durant, Harden, and Russell Westbrook, and it just didn't work out because you have three guys pretty much the same age who aren't really leaders at this point in their careers, or will they ever be leaders? That's another question you have to look at. When I heard the report, I thought it was a little far-fetched because it seems to be too much for Ben Simmons. But then the retort from Celtic fans is, well, yeah, Marcus Smart and Robert Williams III will get this done, and that's not going to be the case either. Philadelphia can get more than that, provided Ben Simmons is invested, and ready to play.
Yeah, I mean that's what it all comes down to, right? Is Ben Simmons being able to play, and at this point, it doesn't seem like he's close at all to coming back to the 76ers. I have my doubts that he will ever play again for them. I just don't see how it will work. So many bridges have been burned by both sides. I don't know how he'll feel comfortable playing for them or they'd feel comfortable, with him taking the court. So I don't know how his value goes any higher than it is right now. Because I just don't see him playing for them, Sap. As far as the Celtics offer, I think that it would be really intriguing to have him here with Tatum and Brown. I think that would be a really talented big three. I know a lot of people on Twitter and social media have pushed back on that because Ben Simmons' value is at an all-time low, and he seems like he doesn't care about basketball. He doesn't seem like he has any friends in the league. So I get that from that perspective. You don't want to bring in somebody like that. That being said, I still believe that he's a very, very talented player. And I think his game fits with Tatum and Brown because he won't be asked to score at all, which I think is perfect for him. But ultimately, I don't see, unless the Sixers really are getting no other offers for him, I don't see how the Celtics would get it done outside of a three-way sort of trade because, yeah, I would like to trade Marcus Smart and Robert Williams and picks for him. But I don't think that is what the Sixers are at all looking for. And I think that trading Jaylen Brown for him would be stupid. Jaylen Brown is the better player right now. He's the more valuable player. So the Sixers asking for Brown plus Williams plus Smart plus pick. I mean, that's insulting.
Is it
so
the case, though, that they could think, the Celtics at least look at this and say that maybe Ben Simmons and Jason Tatum are a better fit than Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, even though we think Jaylen Brown is the better player, that the fit is better with Ben Simmons because he's a defender, he's a facilitator, he doesn't look to score as much, and then Jason Tatum could take over as people expect him to do. Sometimes on the court, Brown and Tatum, it just doesn't seem like it's working. And this has nothing to do with if they're friends or if they're not friends. It just is the chemistry on the court. You don't have to be best friends with your teammate, but sometimes it just doesn't work, that their games don't mesh. Maybe that's the case with Brown and Tatum. We're going to get a chance to see Tatum play without Brown for the next couple of weeks because Jaylen Brown has a hamstring issue. So we'll see Jason Tatum as the primary scorer. And if the supporting players do their thing, maybe Jason Tatum all of a sudden finds his game and starts averaging 30 a night. He looked really good in the second half against Dallas on Saturday. There was no Jaylen Brown in that game. And I also think that he was going up against Luka Doncic. And when he goes up against Luka or Kevin Durant or any of the elite players, maybe he just steps up his game and he, goes through down periods when he's facing Toronto or some other team that doesn't have that superstar player. Who knows? We're trying to read into Jason Tatum's mind. That's difficult because he doesn't really say much. He's
Right.
not exactly an open book. Jason Tatum and Ben Simmons would have the quietest press conference in the history of press conferences. I mean, it doesn't appear that either guy really gets their heartbeat up all that high. I mean, I've thrown out the Ben Simmons for Kyrie Irving. Irving's not playing. Ben Simmons isn't playing. From what I understand, Simmons isn't vaccinated either, but he's willing to get it. So maybe that's something that could happen in that trade that we talked about, I think 3 months ago. Maybe that could happen. Or maybe Philadelphia just wants to move him to the other conference. And there are teams, obviously, that are going to be interested in a talent like that. I've even heard, would Phoenix look at trading DeAndre Ayton for Ben Simmons, because Ayton's having contract issues in Phoenix. Ben Simmons, I think, would fit really well in Phoenix, other than the fact that he once dated a Kardashian, and I believe Devin Booker still dates the same Kardashian.
It's the same. Yeah, I think it's the same girl.
Same Kylie or whatever her name is. She's a billionaire, or I don't know. I stopped watching the Kardashians on E! many years ago. I did watch it before. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making that up. But
really?
Track. Oh yeah, absolutely. Why not? I mean, they're nice looking girls. But that could be an issue, and it's not like a story out of The Onion. I mean, when the star of the team and the new guy that comes there, had one's dating one of the Jenners, and Ben Simmons dated the same Jenner years ago. That's going to be an issue. That got in the way of the Dallas Mavericks years ago with Jason Kidd, Jamal Mashburn, and Jimmy Jackson. That was a real issue. They were, fighting over the same women. I mean, these are young guys, right? I mean,
and also
and it's not like we're dealing with 45-year-olds and even 45-year-olds can get into this type of stuff.
And from the Sixers' perspective, is an Ayton Embiid pairing something that they really want? I mean, that's like a straight out of 1993. So
we're going to be Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon and see what the hell happens. I mean, the best place is Brooklyn because they have a distressed asset who's a headache. Why not trade headache for headache? But they're in the same conference. And that type of trade could be perfect for one team and be a disaster for the other team. Like if Ben Simmons all of a sudden gets engaged, goes to Brooklyn, does what he does really well, play defense and facilitate, that team looks like the favorite. If Kyrie goes to Philadelphia and decides he doesn't really want to play, then Philadelphia is giving away Ben Simmons for nothing, and vice versa. Kyrie Irving and Joel Embiid could be an incredible pair. I think they would. I think they'd mesh really well on the court. So that is a trade that is just got all sorts of ramifications. Maybe that's too much for either organization to take that chance. Although Daryl Morey strikes me as a guy that's not afraid to take chances, right? I mean, so I think he's ready, willing, and able. As long as he thinks he's getting value back for Ben Simmons, he'll go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I think he's got a little bit of that Danny Ainge syndrome, though, where he has to win a trade, 99-1. That's
Danny,
obviously
right?
that was his mentor
under Danny Ainge. So
he did. Yeah. That's the guy who brought him into the business. So I think that there's a little bit of that. As far as what you said about the Tatum and Simmons pairing potentially working better on the court, the reason I disagree with that is because I think the reason Simmons hasn't worked out as well as it could with Philadelphia is because he can't be asked to be the primary or the secondary scorer. He has to be the third scorer on a team.
Yep.
So I just look at it as more of the same with Tatum and Embiid. With Tatum playing that Embiid role where Tatum's asked to do all the scoring and then Simmons can't fill in that secondary scorer void. At least Brown we know can do that. And Knights Brown is the primary scorer and Tatum is the secondary scorer. So I do feel like whatever team Simmons goes to, the best opportunity he has to maximize his value and maximize his game is to be that third scorer. Then he feels no pressure to have to score. Then, suddenly if defenses sag off of him a little bit, they have to, there's two other guys, they can't just double team another dude like everybody does with Embiid. So I think that that's ideally what the situation is for Ben Simmons. And again, that's why the pairing of Simmons with Brown and Tatum is so intriguing, but the mechanisms to get it done seem far-fetched at best.
What if this is a long-term approach, right? You trade Jaylen Brown straight up for Ben Simmons. And again, you have to take back or give up more so the contracts match, right? So now you have Ben Simmons with Jason Tatum. And then in the offseason, you look at Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine. And if that's the free agent you want to approach and you have the available money, then you bring him in as the third wheel. So now you'd have Tatum, Simmons, and Beal, or Tatum, Simmons, and LaVine. Now that could work because then Ben Simmons becomes the third scorer in that trio.
Yeah, so, you better be damn sure that's going to happen. That's the thing.
Well, right, because now you've got Ben Simmons with a lot of pressure on him to be a 20 points per game scorer, which he's not. And the player
and you've just made Philadelphia better.
Right, that's the other thing. Is now you get Jaylen Brown, who's you kind of know what Jaylen Brown's going to be. I mean, sometimes I don't know if he's going to necessarily mesh with certain players because, I mean, Jaylen Brown, as good as he is and as much as I like him, is a somewhat limited player. He doesn't really make anybody better on the court. He kind of has blinders on. He doesn't really make anybody around him better. He can go out there and be a guy who scores 25 points per game, play good defense, bust his ass, all of that stuff. He doesn't really elevate anybody around him. Right. And I don't think Jason Tatum does either. Ben Simmons does. That's one of his strengths. So that's also something that you have to look at. Now, the player I've always compared Ben Simmons to is Scottie Pippen. Now, Pippen was also a guy who was most comfortable scoring in the high teens, but when he wasn't playing with Michael Jordan, he could give you 25 a night. But that was a different NBA. You could win a title. Again, we're talking about Michael Jordan. There's no scorer in the league right now comparable to Michael Jordan. So the Bulls could win with Jordan getting you 35 a night, Pippen getting you 17 or 18. They played ridiculous defense. I mean, that's probably the greatest defensive team in the history of the sport. And then other guys would fill in, whether it be Horace Grant or whoever, giving you 10, 12 points, Steve Kerr or Paxson before him. You could kind of cobble together the scoring. Now this is such a scoring league. Ben Simmons can't be your second leading scorer. To your point, Jet, that's a great point. He's more he's better suited to be your third leading scorer, not your second leading scorer. So that's what complicates this. It's tough. This is like trying to pull an inside straight flush, right? Okay, so you trade Jaylen Brown for Ben Simmons, hoping to get Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal. And if that doesn't happen, you're like, okay, you got to get somebody.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Sap, if I explore trading Jaylen Brown, which I said this before, I think the Celtics need to take a big swing one way or the other. I don't think Tatum or Brown should be off limits, but in terms of guys that are potentially available, I'd much rather trade Jaylen Brown for Damian Lillard or, Bradley Beal potentially if those guys are available than Ben Simmons. Because I at least know what I'm getting there. I'm getting, a guy who can score the basketball. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work or it's the same thing as you have now, but at least you took a risk. So, and with Lillard, you're at least bringing in a veteran leader. So if I were to trade Jaylen Brown, those are guys I'd far prefer to trade him for straight up than Ben Simmons.
And are we also in a place yet in the NBA? And I think we saw this with Milwaukee winning the title last year, that you don't have to make just outlandish moves. Like, we're not in a situation where LeBron was dominating the East for a decade, or Golden State was dominating the West and the entire league for a half a decade, right? There doesn't appear to be a team out there that is foolproof. So you don't have to try to make crazy moves to catch up to this historically great team, because I don't think there's a historically great team in the league right now. There was for a period of time. Golden State and whatever team LeBron was on in the Eastern Conference, they were dominant. So every move you made was to try to overtake them. You don't have to do that right now. Maybe just sit tight with Brown, Tatum, see how they grow, and try to put pieces around him that work, and maybe give players like Romeo Langford and Aaron Nesmith more opportunity to try to grow, which I think has been an issue with the Celtics. They've drafted these guys 14th overall, and Langford can't seem to stay healthy. But Nesmith, again, you can't bench a guy because he has a bad game. I mean, you got to let these young players kind of play through this and develop them. That's what good organizations do, whether it's the Miami Heat or the San Antonio Spurs, organizations that really develop players, even the Golden State Warriors. We said that with a player like Jordan Peele, right? I'm sure he had some growing pains in his first pool. He had some growing pains, but now he's elevated into a really nice player. You've got to let these young players develop. You can't put them out there for 26 minutes one night, and then after they're on the court the next game for 3 minutes and they make a mistake, you can't just pull them off and go from there. So my point being, develop these guys. And then that's an issue that maybe the Celtics aren't very good at right now.
No, I think that's fair, and I totally get what you're saying, and I agree. You need to give time to guys to develop, and they got to get playing time. But I don't think that looking at what Milwaukee did last year is a blueprint for the Celtics for success, because you don't have a Giannis, and that's the key.
That's true.
We said coming in the season he's the best player in the world right now. Maybe he is. Maybe he's the second best player in the world right now. I don't think he's any lower than 3. But as good as Tatum is at times, and as good as Brown is at times, they're not Giannis, and I don't think they'll ever be that good because of just the physical skills and the effort that Giannis puts in. I mean, he puts in a unique amount of effort. So I think that, again, I've seen enough of Tatum and Brown to know that no matter who they develop that's on the current roster right now, it's not going to be good enough to compete seriously for a championship. So I think they need to shake things up, unless they feel like, okay, we know we have this free agent coming, Bradley Beal, Zach LaVine, whoever, and we're going to try and see if that will work out. I have my doubts that just plugging in Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine to this team would work, let alone will happen. It seems far-fetched to think it's going to happen at this point. But just sticking with this current roster, or at least the 2 pillars of Tatum and Brown, and saying, we think we can build a championship contender out of these 2 guys. I firmly am in the camp of, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, because the players we've compared Brown and Tatum to are Jimmy Butler and Paul George. Now, they're obviously younger versions of those guys, and you never really felt that a team that had Paul George or Jimmy Butler as the number 1 guy could win a championship. Now, that may change in Miami this year, but they've also surrounded Jimmy Butler with a lot of really good players. Kyle Lowry, the continued development of Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero, and adding veteran pieces. So maybe that can be different. But yeah, generally, an elite player is the guy leading the championship drive. Looking at Giannis last year, I mean, we're all in agreement that if you put LeBron to the side because he's not playing right now, and he's kind of a unique case, that the argument for the best player in the NBA right now through the first month of the season is Giannis, Kevin Durant, or Steph Curry. Those are the 3 guys that seem to be playing at some other different level than everyone else. So yeah, I mean, that's a good guy to have. And even with Giannis, because of some COVID issues with Chris Middleton and some injuries with other players. They're even playing sub 500 ball right now,
Right.
which is nothing to be alarmed about because, again, very short off season. They won the title in July, and 2 months later they're back in camp. I mean, there's still some unsettled things going on in the NBA with that short off season. I think you can really get back to normal next year when you have a normal off season.
Sure. And once you get that championship under your belt, I think seeding doesn't matter nearly as much. And, the regular season doesn't matter so much because you know how to turn it on in the playoffs. So I think that, if I'm a Milwaukee fan, I'm not nervous about them starting off slowly at all. I just get in and see what Giannis can do. I think that's sort of, I almost think they're pacing themselves a little bit, which you see a lot of really good teams do that. So I wouldn't be worried about it. Again, you know that their ceiling is winning a championship. You know that for a fact. They did it. So once you have that confidence, it changes. It should change your perspective on how teams start the regular season. The Celtics, it's alarming because they haven't won jack. So, it's a different situation. When they start a season 4-6 is a big difference because they haven't proven in the postseason they can do anything.
Yeah, I mean, and the alarming thing is they don't look to be much different than last year, and they changed coaches. And then normally when you change coaches, you bring the new guy in, the effort's going to be better. The buy-in should be better. This is the guy, Ime Udoka, that Jason Tatum wanted, and you see a lot of the same issues from last year. So that is concerning as well.
Yeah, I think, they play like a 500 team. They'll win a game, lose a game, win 2, lose 2, win 3, lose 4. That's the sort of thing that they've done to start the season. And so I expect it to continue. And they've lost in very frustrating manners, Sep. Two double overtime losses. A loss the other night against the Mavericks at the buzzer because Marcus Smart made one of the most idiotic plays I've ever seen and committed a foul to give the Mavericks the last shot and took away possession from the Celtics. Just idiotic. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Coach Udoka and early returns on him, I'm trying really hard to give him 20 games as the, benefit of the doubt. I set that as sort of my mark at the beginning of the season to judge him on 20 games. So we're almost at that halfway point of that right now. We are exactly. Sorry, they're 4-6, so they're at half of that. They've played 10. I'm fighting my urges to say he sucks as a coach because I haven't seen anything from him. He doesn't seem to have his rotations down at all. Doesn't seem to know what some guys are capable of or not capable of. He hasn't seemed to found the right tone for the team to fight through adversity. But again, I really do want to give the guy 20 games to really make my opinions, but the early returns are not positive.
I want to like him, and I do like him personally. I mean, I don't know the man, but I like the way he carries himself. I also think that he's a complete 180-degree difference from Brad Stevens in terms of that tone. He's not afraid to call out players and throw them under the bus, something Brad Stevens never did. Now, where did he learn a lot about the NBA besides playing in it, but also coaching in it is with who? The San Antonio Spurs.
Right.
So again, like a lot of the assistants from Bill Belichick who want to be Bill Belichick, maybe Ime Udoka wants to be Greg Popovich, and that style doesn't necessarily work in many places because the Celtics don't have a player as good as Tim Duncan, and they don't have a player as coachable as Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is a one-off.
Right.
I said this a million times. He is, of all the great players in the history of the league, and I have him as the 8th greatest player in the history of the NBA, and maybe I overrate him a little bit, he's the most coachable player ever. He really is. I mean, Popovich could yell at him, could use him as an example, and Tim Duncan would just sit there. Tim Duncan was not a lot of work to coach. A lot of the other great players, whether it be LeBron or Jordan or anyone else, they could be a handful to coach. Tim Duncan's the most coachable great player in the history of the sport. I don't think there's a player in the NBA today, maybe with the exception of Steph Curry, who's that coachable. So Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are young guys. They're still trying to build their brand. They're still trying to sow their oats, all of those cliches that we use. I don't know if that's the right approach with those guys. Now, maybe Udoka's doing that to try to motivate them. it's still early. You're right. 10 games is difficult, but I'm not crazy about the rotations. I also want to see him try to really develop some of those young players. I want to see Aaron Nesmith play 26, 27 minutes a night. I'm all set with Josh Richardson. Like, we know what he is. I'd rather see Nesmith, even with his growing pains, be on the court more than Josh Richardson. If it costs you some games along the way, well, so be it. I want to see that player develop. I don't think you're right now in a championship mode, right? So let's see
No.
what these young guys can do. Langford, that's the other issue. He just can't seem to stay healthy. Same thing with Robert Williams III. Can't seem to stay healthy or focused, whatever. But let's give some of those young guys an opportunity to grow and see what you have. It's called player development. That's a big part of coaching.
Yeah, and he's buried Nesmith for the most part of the season. He's buried Peyton Pritchard, who had a very nice rookie year, and I think does have a lot of potential. You know, I'm obviously a little biased because he went to Oregon, but I think he has good potential. He's the most consistent 3-point shooter on the team.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm not thrilled at all with the rotations and the sort of burying of some players and elevating of others that don't really make sense. Al Horford's playing tremendously, but I think he's playing way too many minutes. Like, how is he going to possibly be able to play at the end of the season? You know, if he's logging 30 plus minutes a night at his age, it's not really tenable. And, you know, ultimately the biggest factor in coaching is wins and losses, and winning in close games is a big thing too. And virtually every close game they've had, they've lost, Sap, which is very alarming. And the other night against Dallas, you know, he took the blame for it, though he did say, you know, as Marcus Smart made the decision to foul, he didn't tell him to do that. But, you know, that's, I put that more on Smart. But again, they've lost 2 double overtime games, a game last night by 3. Games that they've had leads in the fourth quarter and blown. It's just nothing that you look for in a coach in terms of positive signs. I haven't seen any of those yet with Udoka. I haven't seen anybody on the team improve at all, other than Al Horford, I guess, from the last time we saw him on the court in Oklahoma City. But like, I don't think Coach Udoka has anything to do with that. Al Horford's as old as Coach Udoka.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think part of it is too that how up they are for games, and their home games have been really a disaster. I mean, you don't come out ready to play against Toronto. You have this huge lead against Chicago, and you blow it in the fourth quarter. I mean, you go into the fourth quarter up 14 and you lose the game by 14. I didn't even think that was possible, to be outscored by 28 points in a quarter. It almost doesn't seem fathomable. Yeah, those are issues. Washington beat you here. Now, is that on the coach or is that on the players? I mean, the players have to motivate themselves at some point, but when they're not being motivated, you know, who gets blamed is the coach, because he's easy to replace. He's easy to point the finger at more so than the player. So it is early. I think he's trying to find his way through this. And I just want to see the young guys develop. Tatum and Brown separate, because we both agree they're on their way to developing into perennial all-stars. I want to see some of these other players develop and at least give them a try.
yeah, you know, I think that well, and by the way, they're 0-3 at home, which is terrible. Here's the mistake I think that Udoka made when coming up with this coaching staff. It's similar to Brad Stevens made a mistake with his coaching staff, and he didn't have any ex-players on it. Udoka could have really used a guy who had a lot of experience as a head coach on his coaching staff, because he's he's his first time head coaching. And to my knowledge, I don't believe they have that. I'm going to just do a quick Google search, but when you're a first time head coach, I know he's been in the league as a player. He's coached for a while under Popovich, but he seems a little lost out there, Sap. I don't know if you're getting that impression.
No,
too.
I get the same vibe. And I think maybe you have, you know, in the mafia, we call it a consigliere, you know, someone who isn't necessarily in charge, but someone who's there to lend a helping hand, whether it be a bench coach in baseball. Mike D'Antoni was with the Brooklyn Nets last year, you know, assisting Steve Nash, because Steve Nash had never coached before. Udoka at least has been an assistant coach. Nash came off the tennis court to coach the Brooklyn Nets last year, but then again, he's coaching Durant, Kyrie, and James Harden.
Yeah, no former head coaches, Sap, on their coaching staff.
Yeah,
you know,
so it'd be
their
nice
lead
to get
assistant's Damon Stoudemire, who we all know is a very good player, and he did a little bit of coaching in college, but nothing, no guys who have NBA experience as a head coach, and I think they're readily available, even if they were not a great head coach. Just to have that sort of experience is valuable. So, I
Isn't
think
Larry
building the
Brown
coaching staff
doing this
matters.
in college? Isn't Larry Brown an assistant coach in college?
Yeah,
At wherever. I mean, I'm not saying go get Larry Brown. Well, Larry Brown, I think, is one of the
I don't
greatest
know what
coaches.
he does. He does his own thing.
But you know what I'm talking about? That older guy that sits there and sits next to you and said, "It's time to call timeout." It gives you all of that stuff. It's
There's a billion guys who've coached in the NBA as head coaches. Just hire one of them. Who cares?
It's like in the NFL, you do that. You've got somebody up in the booth on your headset saying, challenge or call a timeout or whatever. Just a second set of eyes so that you're kind of feeding your way there. Because now there's no other NBA head coaches in the group. It's just, former players. So they're all kind of learning together.
It's the same type of mistake that Brad Stevens made by having no former players on his staff. Then you don't have anybody who can relate to those guys. It's just building a staff is important. It seems, because it's not really in the public eye that much with the assistant coaches and stuff, it seems like it doesn't matter. But in terms of like what's going on in the locker room and what's going on the bench during a game, stuff you don't see, I think it really matters. And so I feel like this was a mistake to not do that. And I also, for what it's worth, Sap, I do feel like the fact that the Celtics didn't completely purge themselves with Brad Stevens, maybe Udoka feels like he's like kind of looking over his shoulder. He coached the team last year. It's his roster now. He's his boss now. I don't think that's a great situation either. And I see all these people on social media saying, "Oh, do you miss Brad Stevens now?" I guarantee you, Sap, the Celtics would have the exact same record right now had Brad Stevens still been the head coach. It would not have been any different.
No. I mean, Brad for a while was really good at diagramming plays out of timeouts, and even he wasn't doing that last year. No, I think he had completely lost the team and had gotten as much out of it as possible. It was time to move on. Yeah, I just never have seen a guy essentially get fired as head coach, get promoted to become president of basketball operations. I mean, anybody over on Causeway Street ever heard of the Peter Principle? It's like, you're a terrible vice president, so we're going to name you president. Like,
right.
What? It just doesn't seem to make much sense. You're not a really good co-host, but let's make you the host of the show. You see what I'm saying? I don't know what they're doing. Like I said, are the Celtics are they cash strapped at this point? Because I don't know what these teams' financial situations are, because if any of their businesses are tied to COVID and they lost money, then, that's going to obviously impact the bottom line. We know that's what's happened in Houston. So Could it happen here? I mean, it just looked like, well, we got Brad Stevens signed for 6 years, $42 million. We're not just letting him go. We got to do something with him.
No, I think there's something to that.
Is he going to be the PR director at some point? Because they just don't want to let him go, be the most, highly paid PR director in the league. I don't know exactly what they're doing right. It almost seems like they're rudderless. There's just, you've got the former coaches running things. You bring in this young guy to coach who has great pedigree, but is he really got the autonomy to do what he wants to do? You've got two young guys that, are ascending into star players, but don't seem to have quite enough to get you over the top. It's just a weird thing. And then you sign Marcus Smart to a 4-year extension with Robert Williams III, and then you're going to sell that as, well, maybe you can move them later. There just doesn't seem to be any clear focus on what they want to do.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's what's frustrating. And that's the worst thing you could do. They are directionless. I say that all the time when I'm doing these post-game shows, Sep, and you need to pick a direction, whether it's going backwards to, going back into the lottery, or, making a big swing to try to move forward. But this is the worst place to be, completely, like you said, rudderless. So we'll have to see what goes on with them. We'll obviously continue to talk about them throughout the season. And in 10 more games, I'll give a full grade for Coach Udoka. And maybe he'll improve. Maybe nothing will change. And so I'll be brutally honest, but I think 20 games is a fair measuring stick,
Mhm.
at least to, to give him the benefit of the doubt to try to turn things around a little bit. All right, Sap, before we get out of here, let's talk a little bit about this fight that happened in the NBA the other day. I mean, that's kind of fight is over exaggerating. It was a little scrum. It all started towards the end of the Denver Nuggets Miami Heat game, really in garbage time. Nikola Jokic was bringing up the ball. The Nuggets had the game well within hand. And I forget which Morris it is. Is it one of
Markieff.
the Markieff? Thank you,
Markieff,
Sep.
the former Laker.
The Markieff Morris basically gives a little forearm shiver, cheap shot, take foul for no reason on Jokic, and then turns around to run run backwards like he's going to play defense, and Jokic nails him from behind. And then, there's a scrum, and then it sort of ends with the teams exchanging words and tweets, and the Jokic brothers creating their own Twitter account. Nikola Jokic's brothers actually made a Twitter account to threaten Markieff Morris. So,
and they're going to be attending the game in Miami on the 29th of November. They said they bought tickets, which would you be able to just get tickets from your brother, the reigning MVP?
Yes,
I would think, even though it's an away game. Yeah, it was just interesting to see. I mean, a typical NBA fight, right? One guy's got his back turned, the other guy plows into him, a la Chris Farley from Saturday Night Live. Jokic, I think the problem with him is that the one way to get into his head is to be physical with him, and that's what the Lakers did 2 years ago in the Western Conference Finals.
He's not soft though. That's he's not like a lot of European players. You'd be like, oh, they're soft. He's a tough dude. Like he doesn't. I don't think he loves to be. Like you said, you can play physical with him. I don't think he loves that, but like he'll fight you. Like he showed that he's not.
He will.
His
although
brothers also are really scary looking guys.
Oh yeah, if one brother's 7 feet tall, I'm sure the other ones are 6'6" and beyond, and they all kind of play basketball.
They got tattoos on their necks and stuff like that. They look like villains out of John Wick.
Right, exactly. So that's going to be interesting to see when they show up to the Miami Heat game in Miami. You may see the two brothers going at it with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry, and the perfect team to go at it with them is, of course, the Miami Heat with Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry. Markieff Morris is a very chippy guy. PJ Tucker is an enforcer. Sure. So, and the whole culture of the Heat is be tough. So the perfect, foil for the Denver Nuggets. And first of all, what was he doing on the court at that point? It was late, very late in the game, and they're up by 15. Like, pull him. Like, don't put him in any situation where someone's going to cheap shot at him and he's going to retaliate, get a 1-game suspension. Which actually, in the whole discussion is probably a good thing. Give him a game off. He played every game last year, and one of the reasons he won the MVP. So, yeah, NBA fights are useless, but of course, we've seen the documentary on the Malice in the Palace. That was far from irrelevant. But yeah, it's Jokic. That's maybe one way to get into his mind. And Morris was on that Laker team that, Dwight Howard was somewhat in Jokic's mind in the Western Conference Finals. So that's kind of the way to get at him and see how he responds. He just to me, it looked like, the big kid on the playground that all of a sudden everybody wants to take a shot at, and he's just the biggest guy on the court. And finally, when he's fed up, he just like slams into the smaller guy. And then he kind of feels bad about it, but, it just let his frustration out. I can't really blame him, although, Markieff Morris may have sold this, hit the ground, that stretcher came out, he's going to miss a game. Who knows what that's all about? Right.
I listened to what the guys on TNT said the last night, Check and Barkley, and I kind of agreed with them. If you're going to start it, which is what Morris did, then, don't then suddenly turn your back and say you're the victim. So I think what the NBA should have done, they only suspended Jokic. They fined Morris and they fined Jimmy Butler too. I think they should have just Morris 1 game, Jokic a game, move on. Because listen, it would have never happened had Morris not started it with a cheap shot. Right. So I'm always going to go with, was the shot by Jokic more severe? Yeah, it was. But at the same time, what did you want him to do? Wait till Morris then suddenly turned around and looked at him and then to shove him? I mean, it was an immediate reaction thing. I don't have a problem with shoving him in the back because he immediately went to shove him in the back. He didn't wait till he turned his back and then shoved him. That was just the first angle at him he got. So Morris is I'm not going to say a dirty player, but he's certainly, like you said, an enforcer. That was a cheap
He's a
shot.
chippy player. Yeah, he's a
So
chippy.
the guy who started it, I'm going to give more blame to. Somebody at Twitter said to me, well, Jokic responded to a misdemeanor with a felony. I don't really think that was the case at all. Like, I think, I don't think either shot was as hard as the other
You
person
just
made it
love
out to
Jokic.
be.
You love Jokic.
I do, but
That's
again, I get it. I've been, fouled hard playing basketball before too, and you don't suddenly think, oh, he turned his back, I'm not gonna push him now. You see red for a second, so I don't really blame him. And it was a cheap foul by Morris.
Didn't he do something last year like this? Didn't he flip out in a playoff game against?
Yeah,
Was
it's
it
Phoenix.
against Phoenix? Yeah, he flipped out. I mean, so obviously he's got a temper.
Yes.
And now the book is, let's get under his skin and get him out of his game. I mean, his game is beautiful. I mean, he's a joy to watch. It's like someone carved out some guy from like another era and put him into the NBA today. And he's this giant guy who's a great passer and seems to be playing at his own pace, doesn't it? It's like he's never in a rush to do anything. But that's the book on him. You can't deal with his talent, so let's get inside his head and try to get him out of sorts, and that's the way to go. Yeah, I remember, wasn't he going after Devin Booker or someone on the Suns in the Western Conference Finals or the Western Conference semis last year? So yeah, that's the way teams. He's gonna have to learn with this. Here's the problem though, Jed. Denver doesn't have an enforcer. You don't want Nikola Jokic getting into these battles and getting suspended or maybe getting hurt and getting his. You need an enforcer. Who the hell's the enforcer on Denver? It's. I mean, Jamal Murray, you don't want doing that either, and he's hurt. Still recovering from that gruesome injury at the end of last year. Michael Porter Jr. doesn't strike me as an enforcer, and neither does Aaron Gordon. So you need that type of guy. That's why Miami's got a bunch of them.
Oh yeah, and they're made out of chock full of them.
They're like a football team. I mean, they're tougher than the Dolphins down there in South Beach. But their truest enforcer is probably PJ Tucker, because if he gets suspended, it's not going to hurt the team as much if Butler or Kyle Lowry, who both act like enforcers as well, get suspended, or worse than that, get hurt. Someone decides to throw a punch and breaks their hand and is out for 6 weeks. That's, you don't see that very often, but you don't want to see that. So that's part of it. Denver needs kind of a, they need somebody
to fight for Jokic, not have Jokic be the guy who's fighting.
You don't want your best players fighting. You want, some. I mean, the Celtics had a guy called Jim Luskatoff. That's exactly.
You know where he went to college, Sap? University of Oregon.
Oregon. There you go. In fact, my nephew is friends with his granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she lives in the area, but
maybe he could score one of his old Oregon jerseys for me.
Well, I don't think he's longer with us, but maybe we can approach the
no, I'm saying you're yes, exactly.
Oh, my nephew can try
Who else has them? There you go.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. So we'll work on that. That may be your Christmas present. But that's what he did. ML Carr used to do it with the Celtics. You want Larry Bird getting in fights. Although back in the 80s, I don't want to sound like the old guy, because the 80s was fantastic basketball. In addition to how physical it was, but Bird would actually fight people. I mean, that's, what his mindset was, but you didn't want that. You wanted Larry Bird hurting his hand on Bill Laimbeer's head.
Well, in hockey, don't you always have like the third or fourth liner be the guy who fights?
Yeah, you don't want Wayne Gretzky or Mario Lemieux getting in fights. Right. I mean, what's the point of that? They got to go in the penalty box for 5 minutes, and they're not fighters. They're not paid to do that. So Denver needs some sort of enforcer who's, if this is going on, he takes care of business, that Jokic doesn't have to fight his own battles. And, in life, that's maybe not the right way to do it. It's like, grow up and fight your own battles, but not in team sports, because you don't want to see this guy get hurt or suspended or both.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And maybe that's what's been holding Denver back, is that they need, one of those enforcer types. So we'll see going forward if there's any more fights. And especially, I think everybody will be watching that next game later this month. As those two teams meet again. But Sap, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. As always, we're presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our social media at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer, for all our opinions on different fights and, whatever's going on in the world of sports or just the world in general. We got you covered there. And if you haven't already seen the show on YouTube, it's on youtube.com/JetStryer. If you just want the audio version, it's the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Just type that in anywhere podcasts are found, and you will find us right there. Just download us right to your phone or your computer or your TV. At this point, you can download it anywhere. All right, Sap, we will be back with another podcast. Going to be talking a little bit about Scottie Pippen coming up. So make sure everybody's on the lookout for that. And we will talk to you later. See you, everybody.